he summed it up pretty well for me. This is what it was like leaving 2019, feeling fresh and ready for the future ahead, and entering 2022. And John Travolta's face there sort of says it all. A bit more dishevelled, and that's sort of what we felt the last couple of years has brought. I like looking at words that we use. A term that we're using a lot more now is Generation Alpha, and you've got a Generation Alpha infographic there, and we'll discuss that a little bit. But Oxford English Dictionary put their word of the year last year as the word vax. And it's just such a layman word, isn't it? So much going on with the words that we're using. I found this one interesting. The word that has seen the most increased usage in the last year or so, they put down as unprecedented. We've all been using that a lot. Unprecedented use of the word unprecedented tells us so much about our time. I found this tweet quite an interesting one, picking up on the zeitgeist. Don't know about you, but I can really go for some precedented. We look forward to the precedented ones. But God, in His sovereignty, has given us these unprecedented times, and they are the ones in which we respond. So let's think, therefore, about the future, where things are going. We just finished a report we conducted annually called The Future of Education. This year we surveyed students. We surveyed 1,000 students nationally. Half of them were 15 to 18-year-olds just finishing up their school. The other half were in tertiary studies, and both at TAFE and university. And we wrote a report which you can freely access as an infographic there, but I'm going to give you a quick summary of the top 5 findings in this report that gives a bit of a sense as to the future of education and hopefully some insights for the future of your schools, mixed with the research from this and some other data we've been gathering as well. And the first is choice. We've got a very empowered cohort of students. They are the blue dot generation. You know, they're the blue dot on any screen they look at. This is me, this is where I am, and the world adapts to them. Quite different to the street directory world of the past, where you had to work out where you were or where you wanted to go, and you had to navigate your way. In the blue dot world, centricity of the individual is the reality. I was at the airport lounge yesterday and I found a relic newspaper. This was relic number 1. I've not seen one for a long time, so I picked it up and had a read, which was great. But relic number 2, I was quite shocked. I opened it up, and there is the television guide. So you still can actually look up what's happening, and imagine trying to explain this to Generation Alpha. Here's how the TV works. You actually have to find the program, and if it's on Wednesday night, you have to wait till Wednesday night to watch it. But what if I want to watch it now? You have to wait till Wednesday night. What if I want to watch the second episode? You have to wait till the following Wednesday night to watch that. That's how it works. That does not work for a blue dot generation that are into on-demand and shifting. And so the point of this is to say we've got an empowered generation around education that influence even parental purchasing decisions like education, like the holiday destination, like the family car that is purchased. Children are up ages. They have influence beyond their years and beyond their economic spending. We see the choice played out in the national data. We've seen the Independent Schools Australia analysis of where our students are nationally. So 4 million school students in Australia across 9,500 schools. And if we look at the breakdown across the 3 sectors, the fastest growing one, not just in terms of total students enrolled, but share of the pie is the independent schooling sector. And the fastest growing sector of that are Christian schools. And so that says a lot about the choice of parents to spend their money, their after-tax dollars, on things that really are free up the road in terms of education, but their choice and the outcomes that they want and the values connection and a connection to the community with which they engage is key and driving the choice. Now we see the choice and the opportunities that you have for growth, even in the census data. Our census data was released 3 weeks ago. I'm sure you were, we certainly were excited to count out that. In fact, there's actual footage inside our office when the census data came out. We were pumped. We were jumping around. It was great. So what did the census data reveal? One of the themes of the census data was growth. 25.4 million people is our national population, an increase of 2 million in the 5 years prior, the highest numerical increase we've ever had, a growth rate of 8.6% cumulative over those 5 years. But if we look at where the growth is taking place, crossroads of growth is right here in this sunshine state. In fact, here's the growth rates across the states and territories. You can see some of the states, ACT, really rocketing ahead in 5 years. But those green light states there growing through the three factors of growth, growing through net overseas migration, which we have in New South Wales and Victoria as well, but growing through national increase, which we have Australia-wide. But the third factor of growth that we don't see in New South Wales and hardly have seen of recent years in Victoria is net internal migration. And that's what Queensland has very strongly. So overseas migration, internal migration, plus the natural increase leads to the growth that we're seeing. Now, if we look at the data, 2/3 of Australians living in our capital cities, but keep in mind, while we are capital city-centric, 1/3 lives outside of the capitals. And probably the story of the census is the growth of the cities outside of our capitals, the growth of the secondary cities, and there's been pretty solid growth as well. This is the list of the top 10 fastest growing local government areas in Australia over the last 5 years. And right at the top, you've got Brisbane. LGA has added more people than any other local government area in 5 years. But probably the interesting fact there, if we look at areas outside of our capital cities, 4 of the top 10 fastest growing local government areas, council areas, are non-capital city areas. So growth in our capitals, but even greater growth in the regions and the non-capitals, growth in not just the largest states like New South Wales, and certainly growth represented right across Australia. So that's why you're seeing growth in your schools, just numerical growth, but there's also growth in terms of what parents are looking for as they engage with education back to choice. Now, one of the key talking points of the census, I'm sure you saw the data and saw some analysis on it, is the decline of Christianity as recorded in that question, what is your religion? So it went from 52% in 2016 down to 44% total Christianity. As you can see, a significant drop and a continual drop we've seen for the last couple of decades there. Rise in some of the other religions, and particularly rise in no religion. If we look at the most religious states, the most Christian states by representation, New South Wales number 1, 48%, and a close second, Queensland. Now still keep in mind that we have almost half of the populations of some of our largest states in a voluntary question in the census identifying their religion as Christianity. Now keep in mind how people are interpreting this question has changed. We're getting a more solid number. Cultural Christianity, broad and vague affiliation with a faith or religion is dissipating. What we have is people interpreting this question, we've run lots of studies looking at it, as active and current belief. And so while the question on religion sits amidst the ancestry question, the country of birth question, language spoken at home question, in other words, from a statistical perspective, the ABS have it as part of your identity, your culture, your background. Australians aren't interpreting it that way. They are with ancestry. It still amazes me that more Australians say their ancestry is English than Australian. We harken back even if we haven't had a direct connection with England for a few generations. But not so with Christianity. People say, well sure, parents or grandparents might have been, but if I'm not active in my belief and current in that status, I'm not going to tick the box. So we have a more solid 44% rather than, I'm sure you saw even 4 decades ago, 3/4 of the population, 76% identifying their religion as Christianity. But probably for me what's remarkable is if we measure the practice of Christianity over the same period of time as we've had this decline in affiliation with Christianity, we see no change. In fact, numerically we see an increase because 15 to 16% of the population, according to the National Church Life Survey data, still attend church once a month or more. And so the practice of Christianity is unchanged even if the broad cultural affinity with it is evaporating. And so it does mean we've got opportunity to connect with our communities. And keep in mind, 1/3 of total Christianity, and that more solid number goes to church, but 2/3 don't. And so the church that doesn't go to church is perhaps the church engaged in sending their children to your school, or listening to Christian radio, or wanting that Christian foundation, or at least those Christian values instilled in their children, particularly as they see the cultural shifts in our society shift further from that Christian base. Even those that are not church-going and would not call themselves believers still are looking for that. And that's where many of your students are coming from. And in tough times, we see people search for more meaning, look to the metaphysical beyond the tangible. And we've picked this up in our research as well. This was a study we made earlier this year. Over the last 2 years, so during the COVID pandemic, how, if at all, has the time you've spent on the following activities changed? And this is the proportion of Australians, from a national representative sample of 1,000 Australians, the proportion that said they're doing this more, thinking more about the meaning of life, say half, thought more about their own mortality, a third have thought more about God, had more spiritual conversations, a quarter are praying more, and 1 in 5 are reading religious texts more. Those that said less is a fraction of that. Most was, or many were unchanged. But you get the sense as people are searching for meaning and purpose and certainty amidst the shifting sands and the turmoil of these times. And as parents look for choice, they're looking for that solid worldview connection and that engagement with things beyond the temporal. If we look at generational shifts, this came through in the census data as well. I found it fascinating. Firstly, if we think about our school communities, we've got 6 generations in our society, 6 generations in your schools. The grandparents' generation still connecting with their grandchildren in many ways, more so, involved in the drop-off or the pick-up, involved some of them in funding of the fees. You've got the grandparents involved, you've got the parents, Generation X and Generation Y. And we've got the children as well, the 21st century generations. We call them Generation Z in your high school, and Generation Alpha, the 12 and unders in the junior schools and the early learning centres. So that's the mix of the generations that we have. And how to look at Generation Alpha. In 2011, they were only just being born, so they didn't hit the radar. But in a little over a decade, closing in on the 4 million mark. So obviously big growth in this cohort in the birth years, and this is Generation Alpha, the children of the millennials, or Generation Y. Have a look at the dominant generation, the largest generation in society by percentage share. Now, last time around, 5 years ago, it was still the baby boomers. For more than 5 decades, dominating the landscape, the demographic cohort of Australia. That's changed, and now this time around, Generation Y are the largest proportion of the population by generation. And so engaging with Generation Y, they're your parents, more of them than ever, more children than ever. We've got an ageing profile in our nation, and the census data pointed that out once more. However, we've got more children being born year on year than ever before, a larger generation of school-age students than we've ever seen, and Generation Y moving into that age group in a big way. Let's think about the parents of today that have more choice and that are making the decisions to join your schools, and how they differ from their parents. So the baby boomers, when they were having children in the mid-80s here, median age of marriage mid-20s, today median age of marriage early 30s, age of mum giving birth to first child mid-20s in 1987, today early 30s. So marriage and children, mortgage, career being pushed back from a 20-something phenomena to a 30-something reality. You're seeing older parents. You're seeing 2-income earning parents. This data was fascinating. In a decade and a half, if we look at the proportion of parents that have children under 5, where both of the parents work, it was 14%. It's now 21%, and we can expect, amidst rising costs of living, that proportion to increase as well. So the parents need your support, educational, and they need you to support not only the educational outcomes of the children, but in many ways that character formation and life skills development as well. Let's think about these parents who have this choice, these millennial parents, Generation Y, that you're engaging with, that are the key cohort of family formers in Australia today. Millennials have had a bit of a bad rap over the last few decades. We've got some stereotypes we need to adjust. We probably think these millennials are still the young adults, living life for themselves and having a good time, but they're actually, of course, hitting their 40s at the oldest edge, born since 1980, and they're right in the midst of those parenting years. But the stereotypes persist. I know that because I went to Google and I typed in millennials up, and these were the most searched suggestions popping up there. You can see millennials are addicted to technology, ruining society, the unluckiest generation, entitled bad workers. What is going on with our search terms here as a nation? Time to update our perceptions, because the census data revealed some impressive truths about Generation Y. Firstly, they're the largest generation in our population, as we saw, and they're the largest generation in our workforce. They comprise more than a third of the workforce in Australia, and so presumably they contribute more than a third of the taxpayer dollars to our nation as well. They contributed more children in the first 10 years of their fertility years, their early 30s, than any other generation before them. And the prior decade, there were 2.7 million children born, so 3 million in that first decade. They're the most formally educated generation ever. And they have, in their lifetime, seen massive transformations in education. Have a think about this for a moment. The first census they were part of was in 1981. So I went to the 1981 census, I just looked up some of the data there, it was fascinating. In 1981, more than a quarter of our population, 27% of our population in 1981, recorded that they left school at 14 or earlier. Today, if we look at the latest data of the age group up from that, 15 to 19-year-olds, we've got almost 9 in 10 still engaged in education. What a transformation we've seen in 4 decades, and these Gen Ys have been the recipients of that change, and they've been the promoters and the transformers of this shift. The most formally educated generation ever. In fact, more than half of all Generation Y women, 25 to 34, have a university qualification. And so they've seen the shifts change massively there. They make up half of the Defence Force personnel. I found this fascinating. This was the first year where numbers were recorded around active or past Defence Force service, and the 25 to 39-year-olds, it was 20 to 39-year-olds comprised more than half, so basically the millennials comprise almost half of those who wear the uniform. So they're not only building the next generation in this nation and funding this nation, they're defending it as well. And we therefore updated some of our statistics around, or perceptions around Generation Y. Choice is what they bring. My second trend is post-structural. So the pathways have changed. It used to be, in the 80s, indeed even into the 90s, half the class left at year 10. If it felt like it, that's because that was the case, and headed off to work or vocational training. That's all changed, of course. The pathways, the fluidity of those choices, the options are greater than ever, and we've moved to a post-structural environment. It's not the linear approach that we used to know. It's not the set categories that used to define it. We've seen, I'm sure, just over the last couple of years, we had the year without NAPLAN, and things continued on. We're seeing in our research of parents and making choices around education that they're not looking at the leagues tables in the my schools as much. They're not just focused on that academic. They're looking more broadly, and they recognise that post-school, it's not just about higher education. That can come, that can fit in. It's about employability, it's about thriving in their life, it's about finding a vocation that they're passionate about, and that higher education and further study can fit in a world of post-structural later on in their life. They recognise that it's lifelong learning, that this generation will remain plugged in to education because the workforce is changing so much, and they'll work in jobs that don't yet exist, just as now they're starting in jobs that didn't exist when they began their school, like robotics and AI and social media marketer and cyber security. This infographic reminds us of this concept of infographic, taking information and graphically displaying it in a single page That's only about a decade on. So data design is one of those new jobs that's emerged in the last decade or so. The World Economic Forum put it this way: 65% of children entering primary school today will end up working in completely new job types that don't yet exist. So in this study of these 15 to 24-year-old Australian students, we asked them, well, as you think about the future of work, what defines your idea? What are you looking for by way of a job? And I found this fascinating. Just 14% said that I'm looking for a job. 14% said that their future was employee only, not working anything they've started on the site. We went back 2 decades. You said, what do you think the future will be for your employment situation? They'd say, well, I'm going to get a job. Now only 14% say going to get a job. You've got 48% here who say mainly employee, but side hustle, gig economy, some entrepreneurial thing that I'll bubble away with. And you've got another quarter here, 27% say actually flip that. The main thing is the entrepreneurial thing, the side hustle is the employee. And then if we lift it one more notch, entrepreneur only, say 11%, something that I've started. So we've got, based on this, almost 9 in 10 of these students, certainly more than 4 in 5, saying that they're not just going to be looking for a job, they're going to be creating a job, if not the main thing, at least the side thing, an entrepreneurial generation. So where they work and how they work, it's changing. And they'll work across more careers and more jobs than ever before. Our estimate is 18 separate jobs across 6 separate careers. Lifelong learning and upskilling will define them. Where they will study, the type of study, the formats, from micro-credentialing and upskilling and retraining to the formal qualifications. This is their future, and therefore this foundational education that you deliver in primary and high school is going to sustain them over more careers, over a longer working life, and further education into their future. So mobility of career and employment type defines them. Although there is one area where we're not seeing much mobility. Yes, they're changing courses and careers and jobs. They're changing where they work and how they work, but they're not moving from their parents' homes. They're staying right into their 20s, many through their 20s. I like this acronym that has been given at Stay Home 20-somethings, the KIPPERS generation. That stands for Kids in Parents' Pockets Eroding Retirement Savings. So it does come at a cost. Keep that in mind. Choice of students and parents, post-structural of pathway, holistic in expectation. Here we're saying that parents and indeed the students are looking for more than just educational outcomes. They want their educational experience to, as I've said here, equip them with head, heart and hands well focused for the future. They want the relevance of the information, but of course it's not knowledge that they need when they're just a few clicks away from any piece of information on the planet. It's application of that. It's the people skills, it's the life skills, it's the career-ready skills, it's the ability to adapt and innovate. It's the character formation, the fortitude, the ability to be resilient and adaptive, to think like an entrepreneur. It's these skills that they need for their education. It's holistic. I'm encouraged to see the purpose that they're bringing to their job search. We wrote in this book, Generation Alpha, and you've got the infographic summary, but one sentence I pulled from the book: this is the options generation with unlimited pathways. But we do them no favours to set them up with endless opportunities but no purpose. We wrote in the book that if we just look at the data, this is the most materially endowed generation in the history of the world. Not just in the Western world, we see the rise of the middle class right around the world. And clearly they're the most technologically supplied generation ever, and they're the most formally educated generation in history, as we discussed. And they're the most globally connected, and they've got more opportunities. They will live longer than any previous generation in history. In fact, more than half, most of Generation Alpha will live to see the 22nd century. It doesn't seem that long ago that we were celebrating the 21st century. And how sad if we give them all of these options with this great potential and no clear direction in life. Well, I'm encouraged to see that they are seeking purpose and moving towards 53% of Australians value a strong local community now more than 3 years ago. And so we recognise during the reprioritisation that COVID brought us that connection matters, place matters, contribution and engagement with others matter. We saw Australians reprioritise how they were spending their time, value family and relationships, and as they eased off that unsustainable juggle of life, during the forced pause, they recognised that maybe it was unsustainable. 76% of Australians agree that churches in their local area are making a positive difference to their community. We read the headlines that seem so negative about people of faith and about Christianity, but when you survey Australians, they're warm towards local churches and Christian organisations. In fact, I found this fascinating. This was a study again of 1,000 Australians. We asked this question: if you were personally invited by a friend or family member to attend a church service, either online or in person, how likely is it that you would attend? And have a look at the dark green, which is extremely likely, and the next one along, very likely, more than a third of, or just on a third, online and even in person, are saying that they would they'd be extremely or very likely to attend. We think that there's no way people are going to attend, but you've got a 1 in 3 chance, assuming it's a family member, relational or friendship connection, assuming you've got a basis of trust there. You give out 3 tickets, one's going to turn up. That's a pretty good strike rate. But we have a perception that people are anti the things of the Lord. We filtered by generation here, being invited to a church service, and Generation Z were twice as likely as baby boomers to be extremely very likely to attend either online or in person. They are hungry for meaning and purpose. So we asked this question in the study: when you're thinking about a career, what of the following are most important, extremely very important as you make this decision? What career pathway, what job do they take? What's on the list of hierarchy that determines that choice? Number 1, having purpose and meaning in their work. And number 2, work that aligns with their core values. And then we move down to a workplace that's a community of strong social connections. 2/3 say extremely or very important. Work they do that makes a positive impact on the world around them, and workplace flexibility. And this is astonishing. Just have a look at those words for a moment. What are they looking for? Meaning and purpose in work, core values connection, social connections, positive impact on the world, and flexibility. If we get those right, we will attract and retain this generation. But you can see that they are making decisions on the higher order, not the lower order, from Maslow's hierarchy. They have the luxury of having the survival and the security pre-ticked in their box. And so they're saying, well, we make a difference, have an impact. I think of all of the professions, it's the noble profession of teaching that can better articulate that higher order driver than most. Just think about how it might look from an HR perspective. The survival stuff and the security stuff, it's hygiene factor stuff, workplace health and safety, superannuation, tenure, remuneration. That stuff's important because it is part of the job, but it's not the factor in which they make their decision. It's a given. And they move up from there to the social connection, the collegiality, the growth as they connect with other people, up to the self-esteem of pathways and opportunities and growth, and up to the self-actualization of the values and developing themselves, making a contribution, leadership opportunities, and being all they can be. So if we understand this drive for purpose and meaning, I think we can articulate that better and train it when it comes to the education and setting them up for their careers. In fact, I see that Maslow's hierarchy has been further developed for the 21st century because there actually is something even more foundational in survival and security these days. Decent life, so often the simple things that make a difference. Holistic in what they look for in education and holistic in what they look for in vocation. Fourthly, hybrid. The future will be through the screen as well as gathered. 70% of these students, these 15 to 24-year-old students we surveyed, said that their ideal learning environment is hybrid. So, yes, online, using the digital connection, having that opportunity to connect and learn from home where that suits, and keep in mind half of the sample were tertiary students, so they were far higher in wanting to be able to have some opportunities to learn from home. But also together. In fact, they were the least likely to say that they wanted a fully online learning environment because they're at a social point in life. They know that they learn a lot through the connection, through the unplanned or spontaneous interaction, and a lot of what they're looking for to grow in, the people skills, the life skills, the character formation, doesn't happen through a digitally delivered curriculum. But it doesn't mean that we can cut the live feed or put away the computers, because they do expect some level of flexibility in terms of online learning where it suits and is relevant for the age group. So I guess we'll have to remain used to the Zoom moments like this awkward one when everyone else is getting off the Zoom call and you're struggling to find the leave meeting button as you and your host, and that awkward grin that you give as you're trying to get up. We've all experienced that a lot over recent years, and it's here to stay. And work from home is here to stay as well for this generation. This is the generation that have seen their parents work from home over the last couple of years, and they've therefore seen the benefits of that and have that as a bit of a work aspiration as well. The pandemic has brought about the biggest transformation of work in a century. How we work, decoupling work from location, and it's given an aspiration for this generation as well. However, they were even more likely than the existing generation of workers to say that they didn't just want to work from home, they wanted the gathered workforce, not just the scattered one. 82% describe their ideal working situation as hybrid, where they can work from home on occasion, but they still wanted the gathered one. And this is the reason. When we surveyed Australian workers, 70% said the workplaces where they most experience meaningful and regional social connection and community. Australians are less connected from local sporting clubs. They're not volunteering up the road as much. They don't know their neighbours as well as perhaps generations past did. As we saw, they're not as part of a local worship community that might have been the case a few generations ago. But the workplace is the one social bottleneck through which most Australians pass on a regular basis, and it has become a place of connection and engagement. And so it has not only the collegiality benefits, the values alignment, and the vision sharing, and the encouragement that we gather, and the productivity that sometimes comes as we innovate and discuss together, but it has the social benefit as well. We wrote this book that to some work is simply a job, but to many more it's a lifeline, it's a social interaction, purpose, and place of belonging. And that sums up not only the work aspiration of this generation, but also the study aspiration as well. And you know, you see it on your campuses so much, how when you could get back into the learning in person, how the community came to life, how that is so core to what you deliver. So the future is hybrid. And number 5 here, it's student-centric. Just understanding the empowerment and the characteristics of this generation will help us educate them effectively into the future. What are some of the characteristics of this generation? Well, clearly technology is one of those. We call them not the digital transactors. You know, we as Gen Xers pick up technology like a tool, we use it productively, we transact, we put it back down. They are digital integrators. They wear the technology, they integrate it into their life seamlessly. They're visual learners, they consume content through these platforms. Generation Alpha, as I said, born since 2010. Now 2010 was the year that Instagram was launched. So they've only ever known this sort of world. 2010 was the year that the iPad was released. The world of the digital, the world of the platform, the world of the portable device has been their only world. In 2010, the word of the year was the word app. So it's the application of life and learning that this generation has experienced. It's the TikTok generation. Not only video, but short form video. And video that they don't just consume, but they create. The number one search engine for Australian teenagers is no longer Google. They spend longer searching within the YouTube platform, using it as a search engine in itself. They don't just want to read an article on it, they'd rather watch a video on it. That's how they consume that content. They're surrounded by the technology that they interact with. It's an AI world. They speak to the technology and get responses from it, which is worrying to, again, us parents of today. It's such a different world. I'll be putting my youngsters to bed at night and the question will rise, what is the third largest country by population? Or we get a demographic stats right there. Let's look that up. And suddenly one of them will call out, hey Google, hey Siri, and the answer will be delivered verbally to them. I'm sure we have some concerns about this. I saw this one doing the rounds. My husband asked me why I smoke so softly in the house. I said I was afraid Mark's nervousness. He laughed. I laughed. Alexa laughed. So, maybe there's something to it. So we surveyed these students to ask them where they learn. What are their learning platforms? Or what do they engage or learn from at least daily? This is a percentage that said at least daily they use the following to teach themselves new skills. Number one was teachers. That was good to see. 50% learn from teachers each day. But that was number one on the list, which was great to see. Number two was websites, a close second. Third was a surprise to me, TikTok. 42% of them say they learn at least daily new skills from TikTok. Who would have thought? Ahead of parents. So they're learning more from TikTok than parents, which is worrying. At least parents were slightly ahead of YouTube, but only just. It's the digital generation that engaged on these platforms. Who would have thought that these social platforms, these entertainment platforms would become educational platforms? But that's Generation Alpha and Gen Z, the digital integrators. So by understanding them, I think we can be prepared to better engage with them. Sometimes there are generation gaps, and seeing things sometimes from their perspective will help us bridge those gaps and make sure we're relevant to the future. I saw a text conversation. Obviously an older generation asked a younger person, could you fax me over a copy? And the response came back, no, I can't fax because of where I live. And the incredulous response, well, where do you live? In the 21st century. So we've all got to adjust to these new realities. What I want to do before I leave you with 3 takeaways is just to pause briefly and get you to discuss at your tables. They are the 5 that we have seen the future of education in terms of these shifts and something of the future where it's a choice-based era for both parents and the students, post-structural and pathway and opportunity, holistic in what they want from education, hybrid in that learning experience, and student-centric and therefore relevance in approach. I guess my question is, how are you going with those? What are some examples of how you're seeing that play out in your schools? And to that end, what are some adaptations or changes that you've made to engage with this reality? I might give you a couple of minutes at your tables to discuss what changes you're seeing, how that's presented, and then we'll share some of that before I move to a wrap-up. Now, after morning tea, we're going to have a whole session of workshopping this, so I look forward to more discussions then. And it's great that we're set up in our round tables to have that chat. But just to get a little bit of a taster of what you were discussing, those changes, what are some of those shifts that you have said? Who's got an observation on that, something that's been discussed at your table based on that? Oh yes, right.
One thing we just wasn't the table here we're talking about was with that choice, we have a lot of students come and we have a lot of students go, and that has a major impact on energy that needs to go into both coming or going and coming, and the impact that has on the school.
Yeah, it's a big one, isn't it? There's less stickiness it's part of that empowerment, isn't it? That consumer mindset that people will almost transact, and if everything's not perfect, I'll move and go somewhere else.
Yeah, Tracy suggested, she works in early learning centres, and she said 3-year-old students, they walk out and interview and the parent will say to the student, do you like this school, should we go to this early learning centre, or do you like the one yesterday better?
It's amazing. Wow, it's amazing. Well, that's the empowerment mindset at a whole new level. And part of that mobility is also, it's not just sort of the consumer mindset, oh, I'm not happy here. We see that trend back in a lot of areas, but also it's just the demographics that people are moving, cost of living, jobs, people are moving homes. We saw a lot of people, as a result of the pandemic, relocate because they realise actually I don't need to be as close to the CBD anymore, I don't need to be as close to this job or role, and so we saw the has shifted. So it's a dynamic society geographically as well, which impacts on schools.
We've seen a significant shift over the last couple of years in pathway options for students and senior, particularly we no longer, probably even in the last 5 years, rather than having 70 or 80% of students taking a straight academic pathway, it's now probably 8 or 9% of our students taking a hybrid mixed pathway of both, 5 academic subjects and a vet option as well. So, and that for me has just skyrocketed over the last couple of years.
It's amazing to see that parents are far more happy with that and recognising that even, I'm not sure on the Queensland data, but in New South Wales, a lot of the universities are enrolling. In fact, some took in more than half the students not on their ATAR, but on other entry requirements. So certainly it's more varied to how even people get into uni. Maybe take one more comment if there is one, and we'll save the discussion for the workshop coming up, but last chance for a comment. Let me continue on then and move us down the home straight here. I'll say as well, this PowerPoint will save and it can be distributed to you if you want to access these slides that are put up and some of the data. So, some takeaways here. We've said that these are the big shifts in education from a parental and student perspective, and the technology and the demographics and the worldview and the social trends all inform. What should be our response to that? And I've just got 3 applications here for you to consider. Now, I want to workshop this a bit more coming up after morning tea and get you to really put some detail around some of this and what you think should happen. But my observations from this analysis, number 1, we've got to shift the internal narrative. We sometimes have a siege mentality. We feel in Christian education that society is against us, that we're on the outer, and that there's sort of great problems at the gates. But actually, when you step back and look at the broader data, hopefully some of this helps us see that. We see in this nation there is warmth towards Christianity. We asked Australians in a survey this question: do you know a Christian? Someone who calls himself a Christian, and 92% of Australians said that they did. So of that 92% who said, yes, I know a Christian, we asked them this question: what are the characteristics that you most identify with that person? And we put down 20 characteristics, 10 were positive and 10 were negative. And these were the top 5 characteristics selected out of 20. They see this Christian they know as caring, loving, kind, honest and faithful. There's warmth towards not just Christianity, but to Christians in this country. Now, there's not a lot of knowledge around Christianity. I think along with that, culture of Christianity has dissipated a sense as to really the basics of biblical literacy and the like. And that, for me, was highlighted with this question that we asked Australians in this study: in which century did Jesus live? And 42% got the correct answer. That was encouraging. 28% chose, and this is a multi-choice option, the bottom option there, I have no idea. I was most worried about the 27% of Australians who said that Jesus lived in ancient times before Christ. Actually highlights a little challenge with residual biblical knowledge in this nation. But there are some encouragements with this data as well. I put this one up from this study. 90% of Australians believe, and this is just, this phrase here is a restating, a rewording of the question: Australians should have the freedom to share their religious beliefs if done in a peaceful way, even if those beliefs are different to mainstream community views. Is that the case? Should they have the right, if they're doing it peacefully, to say, I don't want to wear that pride jersey, or I don't agree with that particular approach? We wouldn't get this response from the media. You wouldn't believe that 90% of people are in support of these basic religious freedoms, but when you survey the population, that's the case. Well, how about this one? This is the question. The federal government has proposed a bill implementing religious discrimination to ensure that people cannot be discriminated against based on their religion, just as on the basis of age, race and gender. Do you think that Parliament should pass this legislation? And we've got 81% who say yes. In fact, almost half, 45%, say yes, definitely. For them, it's emphatic. And when we filtered by generation, so 81% said yes, as you can see across the population. When we filtered by generation, we had the youngest generation even more likely to say that. In fact, when we asked the question, I didn't put it up here, there's a whole report we've got on it, have you experienced discrimination because of your religious views or religious identity? The youngest generation were the most likely to say that they have. And so therefore, as you can see, now I put this data up just so that we can get a sense as to the lay of the land and prepare ourselves to respond. Wrote in this report recently, the future is not an inevitable destination, but something that is shaped by the trends, and these can be influenced if understood and responded to. By getting a sense as to what the reality is out there, I think it does help us communicate the right narrative and be empowered to act as leaders of these school communities we lead. So change the internal narrative. It's not as dire as often we think. And secondly, equip and encourage the next generation to be those leaders and to be those difference makers. What will they need to lead into the future? How will we equip them? Well, as we wrote, the most valuable skills will be distinctively human characteristics. Yes, it's a technological future, but everything that can be outsourced to technology will be. That's the whole point of AI and automation, is that anything that's repetitive, anything that's sequential, that doesn't involve creativity and innovation and a human interface, will be conducted by technology. That's why if we can develop people's skills, communication skills, be able to lead across diversity, engage the differences of opinions, think entrepreneurially, work out how to solve problems in increasingly complex times and situations, that will equip us well, and certainly the next generation need that. The sort of leadership styles we're seeing a shift from those that relied on authority and power and structure to those that are more participative and collaborative. This generation, a great example of the pre-rolls of the ELC interviews giving their input as to whether this is their future school, highlights the collaborative nature of their upbringing. And if we can lead in a way that gives voice and opportunities, in a flatter structure way, in a way that empowers through giving that opportunity to have some experience of participation, I think it'll set them up well. It's a generation that looks for authenticity. As we know, trust in institutions is no longer a given. And there's a question around just trusting power, authority, or rank. Authenticity is key. I saw an approach that didn't quite work out. Have you seen that show, The Office? You see Michael Scott in it, and one of his quotes, "If firings will continue until morale improves." It's not highly tuned people skills right there. It's understanding culture, it's communicating across the gaps, it's bringing people with us, it's communicating that vision, but that in a way that can then be executed and involve others and bring about the outcomes. I saw another boss keen to get a message to his staff, a safety message, but his method of attaching the matter just didn't quite have the authenticity of what the message was trying to communicate. So let's lead with authenticity and empower the next generation in that regard. Let's equip and encourage them to lead in these times of great change as we shift the internal narrative. My third little takeaway is understanding the high calling of vocation. I even see that word being used a little more, not just career, not just job, but vocation, from the Latin vocare, vocus, to call. And it's a call of God on our lives. And you've got that, and that's why you're in the leadership roles that you're in the Christian communities that you are in, to make that difference. And you've recognised that it's not just about remuneration, that life and the job is not just about security or the benefits, it's about the difference, the purpose, the mission, the impacts, all those that this next generation was looking at as well. We spend a third of our waking hours in any given week at work. We spend more than half of the years of our growing lives at work. And this generation have recognised that, and that's why we see a high view of work emerging. The old bumper sticker doesn't resonate with this generation as much. I owe, it's off to work I go. This is a generation that we see, and I'm encouraged by it. They're looking for a role where they can be passionate about it, where they can have an impact, where they can use their skills, their gifts, and steward them well for the future and as believers for their Lord. I love Psalm 78. I'm sure we know it well. We will tell the next generation praiseworthy deeds of the Lord, His power and the wonders he has done, so the next generation will know that even the children yet to be born, and they will tell their children, and they'll put their trust in God, will not forget his deeds, but will keep his commands. This generation to generation to generation work of educating the next generation in curriculum, in leadership and life skills, and in the way of the Lord as well. And I'm encouraged to see we've got fertile soil there with this next generation that are looking for that holistic outcome, for that higher learning, for the people's skills and leadership, and to be virtuous in their lives. They want a job where they can empower human flourishing and make a difference with what they do. Not everyone, not all of them, but increasingly it's the case. And the Queen, a great example of long service. I saw this, someone tweeted about this photo doing the rounds, Platinum Jubilee year there. She is still serving and serving the Lord and serving the people. She couldn't make it to every event. We saw here the opening of Parliament, she wasn't able to make it, mobility issues. But someone tweeted, Jen Z, I thought it was pretty cool. Our career goal get to the level where I can send my hat to meetings at the moment. So, in this, just encourage the Queen is setting an example to even the youngest generations. And maybe we could have a hat and do that at some of those meetings as well. It's time for morning tea. I just wanted to leave you with one final statistic because I thrown a few at you, but this one I wanted to get in your minds as well. 1,503. That is the number of days until the 2026 census will take place. 2026. So it's time for morning tea. After the break, we'll be back to workshop together on the 4th.